A blood-red moon hung over Broken Mesa in 1876, casting shadows on a boy scarred by loss. 12-year-old Eli Carter, orphaned by a merciless massacre, clings to a wheat-carved knife, his father's last gift, while his mother's words echo, "Don't let your heart turn to stone." Shunned, starving, and alone, Eli wanders the brutal frontier, unaware that one act of compassion will forge an unbreakable bond with an unlikely ally. Can a single choice reshape a world divided by hate? Subscribe now to follow Eli's journey from outcast to legend, and share where you're joining us from in the comments. What secrets hide in a warrior's gaze? Stay tuned. His courage might change everything. The sun bled red over Broken Mesa, painting the desert in hues of rust and rage. It was 1876, and the frontier sprawled like a half-healed wound, its dust-choked trails winding through a town that smelled of gunpowder and regret. Eli Carter, barely 12, scuffed his cracked boots along a splintered boardwalk, his shadow thin as a whisper under the bruised sky. His parents' screams still haunted him, their wagon train reduced to ash under a mercenary's torch 2 months prior. All he had left was a wheat-carved knife, its handle worn smooth by his father's grip, tucked in his pocket like a shard of a broken life. His mother's last words, "Don't let your heart turn to stone," clung to him, heavy as the hunger gnawing his gut. Broken Mesa's folk saw Eli as a curse, a living scar of the massacre that took 20 souls. Their eyes, hard as flint, slid past him as he slunk by the saloon, where whiskey fumes and off-key piano notes spilled into the street. His stomach growled, a hollow beast fed only by a stolen potato, its skin gray as the ash he'd crawled from that night. His patched shirt hung loose on his bony frame, cuffs frayed from nights spent curled in alleys. To the townsfolk, he was a stray, useful for fetching buckets or sweeping dust, invisible otherwise. They whispered he brought death, like cholera or a Comanche raid, best left to the desert's mercy. Eli drifted toward the edge of town, where the last fence post sagged like a drunk after a brawl. Bone Canyon loomed beyond, its red walls jagged as a broken blade, whispering tales of ghosts and scalps to kids who dared speak of it. Eli didn't care. The canyon promised solitude, a place where the wind didn't carry scorn and the ground didn't bruise. He followed a deer trail, sage brush scratching his shins, the air sharp with pine and earth. His fingers brushed the knife in his pocket, its wheat-carved handle a tether to a father who'd taught him to whittle before bullets stole him away. The memory cut deep, but it was proof he'd once been more than a shadow. He climbed a low ridge, the canyon stretching before him like a sea of stone and shadow. Somewhere out there, he could almost believe his parents waited, their arms smelling of cedar and love. But the West dealt in blood, not dreams, and Eli had learned that lesson when fire swallowed his world. He scanned the horizon, his pulse quickening at a faint sound, a low, pained groan from a rocky hollow below. Curiosity, that old devil, tugged at him, whispering of secrets darker than his loneliness. Dust swirled like gun smoke as he froze, the sound slicing through the canyon's silence like a knife through hide. The groan came again, raw and human, pulling him toward it as surely as a lasso snags a calf. Broken Mesa's warnings echoed, tales of vengeful Comanche, their arrows swift as death. But Eli had nothing left to lose. What was one more risk in a life already gutted? He eased down the slope, boots crunching on gravel, each step deliberate to avoid snapping twigs that could betray him. The air thickened with the scent of sage and something sharper. Blood, metallic and fresh. His heart hammered, urging him to bolt back to the town's scorn, where a whispered word about a native could earn him a crust of bread. But the groan grew weaker, like a man's last breath clinging to life. The hollow opened before him, a scar in the earth framed by gnarled junipers. There, slumped against a boulder, was a Comanche warrior in a deer-hide tunic, his chest heaving under a sheen of sweat and blood. An arrow, its shaft carved with swirling patterns, jutted from his chest, the wound oozing dark down his side. A gash on his thigh, long and cruel, suggested a blade meant to kill. Beside him, a string of eagle feathers glinted faintly in the fading light. Eli's breath hitched. Every tale he'd heard screamed danger. Comanche were raiders, the reason rifles stayed loaded. Yet this man, broken and bleeding, looked less like a monster and more like a soul teetering on death's edge. Eli's fingers tightened around the knife, his mother's words battling the fear clawing his gut. The West didn't forgive hesitation, but neither did it reward a heart turned to stone. The West didn't forgive hesitation, and as Eli Carter stood over the bleeding Comanche, his mother's words burned brighter than fear. The year was 1876, and Bone Canyon's shadows stretched long under a blood-red dusk, the air thick with sage and the iron tang of blood. Eli's hand trembled around the wheat-carved knife, its blade glinting like a star in the fading light. The warrior, Ironhawk, slumped against the boulder, his deer-hide tunic soaked crimson, the arrow in his chest a cruel stake pinning him to death's door. Eli's pulse thundered, every tale of Comanche raiders screaming for him to run. But the eagle feathers at the warrior's side caught his eye, their faint shimmer a quiet echo of his father's knife, a sign, maybe, that mercy wasn't just a fool's bet. He dropped to his knees, the gravel biting through his worn trousers. The arrow's shaft was slick with blood, its carved patterns rough under his fingers. One wrong move could kill the man, but leaving it would be no kinder. Eli gripped the arrow, his breath shallow, and yanked hard. A sickening squelch tore through the hollow as Ironhawk's body jerked, a low moan escaping his cracked lips. Blood pulsed from the wound, staining Eli's hands red as he pressed them against the warrior's chest, willing the life to stay. He tore strips from his own shirt, the fabric ripping like a snapped promise, and bound the chest wound tight, the cloth soaking crimson instantly. The thigh gash, raw and deep, needed more. Eli scrambled to a nearby crevice, finding a trickle of rainwater pooled from last night's storm. He cupped it in his hands, dribbling it over the wounds to wash away grit and blood. Ironhawk's face was gray as ash, his breath ragged, each one a gamble against the dark. Eli's hands moved with a steadiness he didn't feel, tying knots as he'd once mended nets with his father by a river long gone. Every rustle in the sagebrush made him flinch, expecting a rifle's glint or a mercenary's laugh. Broken Mesa's scorn was a half-hour's run, but going back meant betrayal, not just of Ironhawk, but of the knife in his pocket, its wheat-carved handle a vow to keep his heart alive. He spotted a pile of bones, likely from a coyote's kill, and a few wild potatoes scattered in the dirt. Hunger gnawed, but survival came first. He gathered the potatoes, their skins blotched like plague scars, and used a flat rock to crush them into a paste. With a fire too risky, he mixed the paste with rainwater in a tin cup scavenged from a miner's camp, creating a thin gruel. Eli knelt beside Ironhawk, lifting the warrior's head with care. The man's eyes flickered open, dark as obsidian, sharp despite the pain. Eli spooned the gruel with a splintered stick, each drop trembling as it reached Ironhawk's lips. The warrior swallowed, slow and pained, his gaze locking on Eli's face, searching for deceit in the boy's dirt-streaked eyes. "Why?" he rasped, his English halting, voice like gravel under a boot. Eli froze, the question cutting deeper than the canyon's wind. "You were dying," he muttered, avoiding the warrior's stare. Couldn't walk away. Ironhawk's eyes softened, a flicker of astonishment crossing his face before exhaustion pulled him under again. The hollow grew darker, the canyon's walls closing like a trap. Eli's hands, still sticky with blood, worked fast. He dragged Ironhawk to a narrower slit in the rock, hidden by junipers, each step burning his scrawny arms. The blood trail he'd left was a beacon for trouble. Callahan's men roamed these hills, their greed sharper than their blades. Eli scattered dry needles over the stains, praying the wind would blur the scent. The warrior's eagle feathers glinted faintly, a fragile tether to the choice Eli had made. He crouched beside Ironhawk, checking the bandages, now heavy with blood. The gruel cup sat empty, its bitter taste still on Eli's tongue. A coyote's yowl sliced the silence, and Eli's heart lurched. He crawled to the crevice's edge, peering into the darkening canyon. Hoofbeats echoed, faint but growing, a drumroll of danger from the direction of Broken Mesa. Eli's breath caught, the wheat-carved knife heavy in his pocket. Ironhawk stirred, his hand twitching toward the eagle feathers, as if they held the weight of a lost world. The canyon's red walls loomed, their shadows whispering of hunters and blood. Eli's choice to save a stranger had set him on a path with no way back, and the West was coming to collect its due. The West was coming to collect, and its hoofbeats thundered closer, a storm breaking over Bone Canyon's blood-red walls. The year was 1876, and Eli Carter crouched in the juniper-shadowed crevice, his heart pounding like a war drum as the distant rider's dust curled toward the sky. Ironhawk's eagle feathers glinted faintly beside him, a fragile vow tying boy to warrior in a world that dealt in death. The warrior's breaths were shallow, his bandages heavy with blood, but his dark eyes burned with a will to survive. Eli's fingers tightened around the wheat-carved knife, its handle biting his palm as he scanned the canyon's edge. Callahan's men were near, their greed a blade sharper than the arrows they'd loosed on Ironhawk. Eli dragged the warrior deeper into the crevice, the rock walls closing like a grave. The blood trail was covered, but the hoofbeats grew louder, boots crunching on gravel beyond the junipers. Eli's breath hitched, his mind racing with images of Sheriff Callahan's cold grin, the man who'd burned his family's wagon under a red moon. He couldn't stay here. Mercenaries sniffed blood like coyotes. "We gotta move," Eli whispered, his voice barely louder than the wind, hissing through the sagebrush. Ironhawk nodded, grimacing as he forced himself to stand, leaning heavily on Eli's scrawny shoulder. The boy's arms burned, but he guided the warrior along a deer trail toward Red Moon Canyon, a sacred place whispered about in Broken Mesa, forbidden to settlers, a name that carried both reverence and dread. The trail wound through a maze of red stone, the air thick with pine and the metallic sting of fear. Eli stepped on a stone to hide their tracks, mimicking Ironhawk's silent tread as best he could. The canyon's walls rose higher, their shadows swallowing the dusk's last light. Red Moon Canyon opened before them, its cliffs glowing like embers under a star-strewn sky, dotted with ancient carvings that seemed to pulse with secrets. Eli's gut twisted. He was a white boy in a place no settler belonged, and the eagle feathers at Ironhawk's side felt like a brand marking them both for judgment. A low whistle cut the silence, sharp as a blade. Shadows moved at the canyon's mouth, swift and silent, and 3 Comanche warriors emerged, their moccasins noiseless on the rocky ground. Their faces, painted with black and ochre, blended with the canyon's scars, their bows taut, arrows aimed at Eli's chest. The leader, a man with a scar-twisted lip, barked a command in a tongue Eli didn't know, his eyes burning with fury at the boy's intrusion. Eli's hands raised, trembling, still crusted with Ironhawk's blood. Ironhawk staggered forward, his voice weak but sharp, speaking rapidly in Comanche, gesturing to Eli and the eagle feathers. "He saved me," he rasped in English, his words a shield against the arrow's threat. The warriors hesitated, their bows half lowered, but distrust hung heavy as a loaded rifle. The scarred leader stepped closer, his shadow swallowing Eli's small frame. He grabbed the boy's wrist, inspecting the bloodstains, then spat a question that needed no translation. Why should they trust a white boy on sacred ground? Eli's throat tightened, his mother's words echoing. "Don't let your heart turn to stone." He reached into his pocket, pulling out the wheat-carved knife, its blade glinting like a prayer. He held it out, handle first, offering it to the leader, as if laying his life bare. The canyon fell silent, the warrior's eyes widening at the boy's reckless honesty. If this tale's gripping you like it's got us, hit that subscribe button to ride along with Eli's journey. Your support keeps these stories burning bright in the frontier's heart. The scarred warrior's grip loosened, his gaze flicking to Ironhawk, who nodded, clutching the eagle feathers like a lifeline. The leader stepped back, barking an order, and the arrows lowered, though suspicion lingered like smoke. They bound Ironhawk to a makeshift stretcher of branches and hide, their hands quick but careful. Eli was shoved forward, stumbling into the canyon's depths, the warriors' rifles glinting with menace. The trail twisted toward a hidden camp, the air growing thick with the scent of smoke and roasted meat. Eli's pulse raced, the knife gone, but its weight still heavy in his chest. Red Moon Canyon's walls loomed, their carvings watching like spirits, and the hoofbeats of Callahan's men echoed faintly behind. Eli's choice had brought him here, to a place where trust was scarcer than water, and the Comanche's judgment waited like a noose under the desert stars. Red Moon Canyon's stars burned cold, their light carving shadows across the Comanche camp where Eli Carter stood, a boy caught in a noose of distrust. The year was 1876, and the canyon's red walls glowed like embers, their ancient carvings watching as the warriors' rifles glinted with menace. Eli's chest tightened, the absence of his wheat-carved knife a fresh wound, its offering to the scarred leader a gamble that had bought him only a moment's reprieve. Ironhawk swayed on his stretcher, his eagle feathers catching the firelight, a silent vow that kept Eli rooted amidst the tribe's piercing stares. The hoofbeats of Callahan's men were a distant drum roll, but the air crackled with a closer threat, a storm about to break. A sharp crack of gunfire shattered the silence, splitting the night like a thunderbolt. Dust boiled from the canyon's eastern edge, screams rising as a young Comanche scout sprinted into the camp, his face streaked with war paint and panic. "Callahan's men!" he shouted, voice raw as torn leather. "They're hitting the fields!" The warriors surged, grabbing bows and rifles, their moccasins churning the earth as they fanned out toward defensive posts. Women herded children into hide lodges, their eyes sharp with fear. Ironhawk gripped Eli's arm, his voice a low growl despite his wounds. "Stay close, boy." Eli nodded, his pulse hammering like a blacksmith's anvil, the canyon's walls closing in like a trap. The camp's heart lay exposed, and only a handful of warriors were left to guard the wounded, and Eli. He scanned the western tree line, where junipers swayed under the red moon's glow. Shadows moved, too deliberate, too quiet. His gut twisted. He'd seen this trick before, the night his family's wagon burned. Callahan's men were splitting their forces, the eastern attack a decoy to draw the warriors away. 5 mercenaries crept from the trees, their blades catching the firelight, eyes locked on Ironhawk, a strike to break the tribe's spirit. Eli's breath caught, memories of Callahan's laugh slicing through him like a blade. Without thinking, Eli bolted toward the scarred leader, dodging a warrior's grab. "West side!" he yelled, voice cracking like a snapped branch. "They're coming for him!" The leader spun, his eyes narrowing as he followed Eli's point. The warriors pivoted, arrows nocked, rifles raised. Eli scrambled to Ironhawk's stretcher, snatching a broken arrow shaft from the dirt, its jagged end heavy in his hands. The mercenaries burst forward, guns blazing, their boots pounding the earth. A shot grazed the scarred leader's arm, blood blooming dark on his sleeve, but he stood unbowed, shouting commands that sent arrows flying like hawks. Eli ducked beside the stretcher, gripping the arrow shaft, his knuckles white. A sixth mercenary circled behind, pistol aimed at Ironhawk's back. Instinct took over. Eli lunged, swinging the shaft with all his strength, its splintered edge cracking against the man's wrist. The pistol clattered to the dirt, the mercenary howling as he clutched his hand. A Comanche arrow, swift and silent, found the man's throat, dropping him where he stood. The skirmish erupted, steel clashing, gunfire splitting the air like thunder. Eli's heart pounded, the canyon's red walls echoing with the chaos of blood and grit. Callahan himself emerged from the shadows, his cold grin glinting under the red moon. "That boy's mine," he roared, his voice a venomous echo of the night Eli's world burned. "He dies with his kin." Eli froze, the arrow shaft trembling in his grip, his mother's words, "Don't let your heart turn to stone," battling the rage in his chest. Callahan charged, his blade raised, aiming for Ironhawk. Eli moved faster, darting forward, the arrow shaft useless against steel. He threw his weight into Callahan, shoving him toward a jagged ledge. The sheriff stumbled, his boots slipping on loose gravel, and plummeted into the canyon's depths with a scream that faded into the dark. A Comanche warrior loosed an arrow, its tip finding the fallen man's chest, ensuring the West's justice. The mercenaries fell back, 3 dead, the others fleeing into the junipers, their curses swallowed by the wind. The camp's drums began to pound, a deep rhythm echoing like a heartbeat across the red earth. Eli's chest heaved, the arrow shaft still clutched tight, its tip stained with the mercenaries' blood. Ironhawk's gaze met his, a nod of gratitude passing between them. The scarred leader stood nearby, his wounded arm bleeding but his stance steady, his eyes tracing Eli's dirt-streaked face with a flicker of respect. The canyon settled, its walls bearing witness to a boy who'd fought for strangers, against his own kind. And the drum's pulse promised a reckoning still to come. The drum's pulse quickened, a thunder rolling through Red Moon Canyon as the warriors returned from the fields, their faces etched with dust and triumph. The year was 1876, and the canyon's red walls stood sentinel under the fading red moon, their ancient carvings flickering in the firelight like ghosts of battles past. Eli Carter stood amid the settling chaos, his hand still gripping the bloodied arrow shaft, the weight of his deeds pressing heavier than the desert night. Ironhawk, propped on his stretcher, watched with eyes sharp as flint, while the scarred leader's gaze shifted from wariness to something akin to appraisal. The air hung thick with smoke and the metallic tang of blood, the camp's heart beating in rhythm with the drums, a reckoning for the boy who'd turned the tide. Black Eagle, the Comanche chief, emerged from the shadows of a hide lodge, his silver-streaked braids swaying like pendulums of judgment, tall and unyielding as the canyon stone. His presence silenced the murmurs, drawing every eye. The warriors formed a loose circle, their rifles slung low, painted scars gleaming under the stars. Eli's pulse matched the drums, his scrawny frame taut under the tribe's collective stare. The chief's eyes, dark as a storm's core, locked on him, stripping away the boy's defenses layer by layer. "You fought with us," Black Eagle said, his voice resonant as a canyon echo, carrying over the crackle of fires. "Against your own blood." "Why?" Eli swallowed, the arrow shaft heavy in his grip, memories of flames and loss fueling his words. "Ain't about blood," he replied, voice steady despite the knot in his throat. "It's about what's right. Couldn't let him take more." The chief's face remained impassive, but a murmur rippled through the circle, warriors exchanging glances. Ironhawk spoke up, his tone gravelly from pain, gesturing to the eagle feathers at his side. "He pulled death from me, warned of the flank, struck for our kin." The scarred leader nodded, his wounded arm bound, but his stance firm, adding his voice to the chorus. The drums swelled, a deep cadence that vibrated through the earth. Black Eagle raised a hand, and silence fell like a blade. He stepped forward, his shadow engulfing Eli, and placed a calloused palm on the boy's shoulder. "The canyon has seen your heart," he declared. "You are no longer shadow. You are wind." From a pouch at his belt, he drew a string of black eagle feathers, their tips dyed crimson with ochre, symbols of the tribe's fiercest guardians. The chief draped them over Eli's neck, the feathers cool against his sweat-damp skin, their weight a mantle of belonging. A roar erupted from the warriors, over 200 strong, their voices blending into a howl that shook the junipers. They raised weapons high, rifles, bows, knives, then bowed their heads in a moment of solemn unity, the drums pounding like the West's unyielding heartbeat. No kneeling for these men. Their honor was forged in grit, not genuflection. Eli's chest tightened, the feathers brushing his collarbone, a bridge between his lost world and this hard-won kin. Ironhawk's aunt, her gray braids framing a face softened by the fire's glow, approached, her eyes tracing the boy's features. "Little Feather," she murmured, the name settling like dust after a gale. The camp stirred back to life, women distributing strips of venison roasted over mesquite coals, the scent cutting through the gunpowder haze. Eli accepted a piece, its tough fibers a welcome burn against his hunger. Children peeked from lodges, their curiosity overriding fear, while warriors clapped his back with rough camaraderie. He sat by a fire pit, the flames dancing shadows across the canyon walls, and felt the feather's presence, a tether to survival. The wheat-carved knife, returned by the scarred leader with a grunt of respect, lay beside him, its blade catching the ember's light. Two worlds converged in his hands, the settler's tool and the Comanche's emblem, scars of loss woven into strength. Night deepened, the stars a vast canopy over Red Moon Canyon. Eli listened to tales spun in low tones, hunts across endless plains, spirits whispering in the wind, victories clawed from mercenaries' grips. The drums faded to a steady thrum, a lullaby of grit. But beyond the fire's reach, the horizon whispered threats. Surviving Callahan's men lurked in the shadows, their rifles hungry for revenge. Eli's journey as Little Feather had forged a family from fire and blood, but the West demanded vigilance. The canyon slept uneasily, its red walls guarding secrets yet untold, and the boy knew dawn would bring new trials in a land that never rested. Eli Carter's journey from Broken Mesa's outcast to Little Feather proves mercy can forge kin where hate once ruled. In the unforgiving West of 1876, his courage bridged worlds, showing a boy's heart can shift destinies. What stirred you most about Eli's tale? Did his defiance of loss echo in your soul? Drop your thoughts below. Your voices keep these stories alive. We're grateful for every moment you've spent riding through these rugged canyons with us. Until the next frontier saga, keep the fire burning and the trails clear. We'll meet again under these star-strewn skies, where the West's grit and spirit endure.